So this is my inside the Lords, although I'm actually inside Church House, which is near the Lords, and there's a lot of background noise because it's the end of the synod, the Church of England synod, and they're all a bit demob happy, truth be known. I'm here because we're about to have a Battle of Ideas meeting, and we're planning our festival for this year for the Academy of Ideas. I've snuck away, therefore, from the Lords mid-debate. This week in the Lords has been very fractious. It's been very fractious because there's the fallout from Partygate. Nobody's quite sure whether Boris Johnson's going to survive. The Tories are what can only be described as in a state. Everybody wandering around in huddles discussing the fate of the Prime Minister. Very distracting from the main business of Parliament. The other reason why people are in a bad mood is it's about to be recess, otherwise known as half-term. Obviously, people in the House of Lords don't even have children, so I don't know why we've got a half-term recess, but anyway, so everything's been pushed through, and the Nationality and Borders Bill, the immigration bill, has caused some aggravation because there's so many amendments. There's a lot of good reason why you should scrutinise a bill, but there is some aggravation that the Lib Dems have put in 200 amendments to this bill, and they treat each amendment as though they're all equally important. So although there are some very shoddy parts of the bill, it's also the case that if you basically almost try and filibuster it with so many amendments, you don't get anywhere. And that meant that the Lords sat till 3:20 in the morning on Tuesday. I have to say, I abandoned ship before then. It was a shame. I did want to speak, but I just thought, I'm not going to do that. And it was very unusual for it to be so late. I am about to go back after our Battle of Ideas meeting to try and speak on citizenship. But politically, what's all this about? The reason why it's important is because all of those amendments from the Lib Dems and the Labour Party actually are basically trying to stop the government tackling the problem of the illegal migration on boats. Now they're trying to do lots of other things that are terrible, and in typical Home Office Priti Patel fashion, she's thrown everything and anything at it. There's lots of things that you might want to say that's wrong, and I think the stripping of citizenship is one of them. I think a clause that actually says, in all seriousness, that you will be prosecuted if you help a drowning person, if you're in the Royal Navy, or it's not just draconian, it's inhumane, and I would want British citizens to always save a life if they saw someone drowning. That would be a good citizen for me. It would be cowardly not to do so. To try and make that illegal is just so mean-spirited. However, the general mood is that you have to go along with the idea that anybody who arrives on these shores is a legitimate asylum seeker and refugee fleeing war. Nobody's ever allowed to challenge that. And if there's anybody who dares speak against it, and there's only one or two who dare speak against it, they're treated with utter contempt. And the assumption is we know best. And every now and then somebody will stand up and remind the House, look, there is a public debate going on outside, and this is completely slapped down as populist, giving into racism, giving into xenophobia. And the terms far right have been uttered throughout the whole of this time. So the implication is that anybody who cares about controlling borders is just playing to some far right Trumpian, the score, playbook. And I think that the fact that a part of parliamentary scrutiny of a bill is so disrespectful of public concerns, regardless of where you sit on the issue, that it shows me how far removed they are from what's happening in society. So I will go and speak tonight. I haven't spoken lots this week at all, but I found it dispiriting but enlightening to see parliamentarians absolutely behaving as though they are above the fray and refusing totally to engage in anything like a real debate. Secretly, a number of people, even from the Labour benches, have approached me and told me I was very brave to speak out and to talk about what the public debate is. They haven't said that out loud, though. There's a kind of, well done, somebody's got to say it. It's a shame that a few more of them don't. At the same time that's going on, I just left an interesting amendment and debate put forward by the Lib Dems again, which said London's been taken over by a load of foreigners, but because they're rich ones, they were allowed to say it. I've never heard so much xenophobia. I mean, my goodness, they were all standing, there was people jumping up saying, there's all these foreigners, they've come over here, they're taking our houses, they're taking our office blocks, they're avoiding proper scrutiny, and you think, it's so ridiculous that they can't see the irony of the fact that they actually are basically saying poor little refugee type people who need our help and benevolence, horrible business people coming over from foreign countries, and and so on and so forth. So you get my gist. The other issue that's still lurking around is, of course, the cost of living and energy crisis, and it was with some, I can congratulate the government for at last opening up the North Sea oil wells, and they're quite, I think I can say that they are saying we have to have a very big transition period using fossil fuels and oil and gas until we get to net zero. So there's a bit of rowing back because of the popular concerns there, and that's entirely appropriate. But when I raised the issue of shale gas and fracking, immediately the minister wanted to close that discussion down and say, no, we're not going to deal with it. I think there is a real inability for parliamentarians to realise just how serious this issue is. People have stopped being frightened about the virus. They are really frightened about their bills. But I was really pleased to hear, and I'm going to be looking out for this, of a couple of rank and file campaigns. One in the northwest, which is crossing left and right. There's going to be a cost of living campaign and really aims to tackle some of the issues around what we might do to genuinely solve the energy crisis and not have ordinary people pay for the mess that net zero is making. A recognition that there is some kind of movement internationally, whatever you think about the truckers in Canada, but a bit like the Gilets jaunes in France, that there are people who are just saying enough is enough. And I think that we have to give credit as well to the campaigns that have managed to force the government back from vaccine mandates. And I know not everybody agrees that they should be forced back, but that was actually a grassroots rebellion. Okay, final thing to say is that Parliament, and I've had a lot of people in to visit, Parliament, as I'm walking around with those visitors, you suddenly realise that this is the seat of power. And it's where I work now, so it's sort of very odd to be walking around this brilliant place. But it's set up as a place that's separate. And I can't emphasise to you enough that this needs to change. I want to abolish the House of Lords. We've had that conversation endlessly on here. But it exists. It's a place that actually has a massive impact on the legislation of this country. And more people are beginning to ask questions of what it does. And you can see what it does because it makes itself publicly available and nobody bothers to watch. But I can't stress enough that people have now got to start taking legislation seriously, reading the stuff, reading the background, looking at what's happening in Parliament, not because I want to waste your time with all the work I have to do, but because I genuinely think that if people saw the kind of laws that are being passed on their behalf, that they would be horrified. And at the very least, they should be part of the conversation. So my commitment post the recess is that I'm going to make sure that I put on my website what things you should be reading, what you should be looking out for, as well as obviously doing my weekly Inside the Lords. Now I've got to go and plan the Battle of Ideas, which is far more intellectually and politically important than anything I do inside the Lords.